When dragons flew in days of old, with valor in their wings, one fell prey to evil's song, and learned what Satan sings. Goliath, stained with Satan's words, made other dragons flee, for songs like leaven spread decay, corrupting souls born free. Now Satan's scales coat dragon lore, he hides between the lines. He sings foul words in books corrupt, and dances on their spines. Are dragons vile? Are dragons tame? Depends on whom you ask. Do scales hide tricks of Satan when he dons the fearful mask? One man corrupted all his kin, one dragon brought all shame. One man redeemed his fallen race. Will dragons find the same? These words open the first book of the Dragons in Our Midst series by Bryan Davis. The words of this riddle prophecy give glimpses into what's to come over the 4-book-long series, and its equally long companion series, Oracles of Fire. In these books, Davis manages to combine Arthurian legends, dragon lore, and Bible stories into one seamless fantasy adventure about the fall and redemption of the dragon race. But why dragons? What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word dragon? Is it something like this? Or this? Or maybe your image of a dragon is taken straight from the Bible and the book of Revelation. Not exactly positive images. In fact, they're rather devilish, don't you think? Yet these are Davis's heroes and villains. The story revolves around young Billy Bannister and Bonnie Silver, dragon-human hybrids known as anthrazels. Bonnie has dragon wings, and Billy has the ability to breathe fire and sense danger. Their dragon parents, Clefsphere and Hartana, were transformed into humans in the days of King Arthur by the prophet Merlin. The dragon race has good guys and bad guys, those who are loyal and those who commit the worst acts of betrayal, and a dragon who falls just as the angels and humans before him, and a savior who will give his life to redeem his race. Parallels can be drawn between the story of the dragon's fall in Dragons in Our Midst and the fall of Satan and the temptation and fall of humans in John Milton's Paradise Lost. Davis actually has Satan as one of his characters, though he doesn't become named as such until the second series, and even then, Davis's Satan is never in his true form. Davis's Satan took over the body of the first dragon ever created. This dragon was named Eremos, and was one of the good dragons, until the flood came and he died, sending his son Makaidos on the ark instead of himself. When Eremos dies, Satan takes over his body. Similarly, Milton's Satan takes over the body of the serpent as well as other animals. Both Satans play the role of the tempter, the deceiver, and the fallen. By using a fantasy setting, Bryan Davis makes his version of the Paradise Lost story more memorable, appealing to his young adult audience, and by using dragons instead of humans, he allows his reader to be an objective observer to the fall instead of feeling invested in the story, such as might happen when reading about the human characters in Paradise Lost. But going back to dragons, we associate them with Satan, but when did that start? Where did that idea come from? According to the Encyclopedia of Medieval Folklore, the word dragon began to be used in the Bible due to mistranslations of 3 Hebrew words for monster. This ultimately led to the dragon being interpreted as a symbol of pride by medieval readers, which was then allegorically associated with the author of pride himself, Satan. The historian Paul Newman traces the history of the artistic representation of the devil throughout history in his book, The Hill of the Dragon. Over time, the biblical serpent began to seep into folklore, to the point that, as Newman says, the dragon and the devil were sometimes employed as interchangeable personalities. As mentioned before, the book of Revelation speaks of a dragon. Chapter 20, verses 1 and 2 says, "Then I saw an angel coming down from the heavens. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years." Milton even alludes to this in the narration of Book 4 of Paradise Lost, saying, "Then when the dragon put to second rout, came furious down to be revenged on men." So if dragons have been associated with the devil for so long, why did Davis choose to make his heroes dragons? One reason he cites in his workshop Wizards and Warlords is that the fantasy element helped a story stay in a child's mind longer, He frequently brings a real sword with him to school speeches, and this makes his talks very memorable. Now, I thought about borrowing a sword from stage combat class, but decided against it. Dragons are fantastic creatures. They can fly, they can breathe fire. What's not to love? And honestly, is it so hard to believe that there are no good dragons? That seems kind of speciesist to judge an entire species based on what we know from fairy tales in the Bible. Satan uses a particular argumentative strategy and is very sly and cunning with his words and speech. In Paradise Lost, he preys on Eve's vanity. Later in the Bible, Satan will try to convince Jesus to do something that is wrong by manipulating and mocking words of Scripture. One of the first things the reader learns about Eve's character in Paradise Lost is that she thinks very highly of her physical appearance, a trait that can and will lead to the sin of vanity after the fall. When Eve is created, she sees her reflection in a pool and finds it attractive, and is completely enthralled by her own beauty. Adam calls to her, she turns to see him, and decides that she likes her own reflection better. Satan is listening and paying attention so that he can use this information later. When he begins to tempt Eve, he calls her fairest resemblance of thy Maker fair, and continues to describe her beauty as celestial, and likens her to a goddess. The first time we see the dragon, who we later realize is Satan in Eremos' body, is in the book Circles of Seven, the third of the first series of books. In it, Bonnie and Billy have traveled to Hades by means of the magical properties of the sword Excalibur. Unfortunately, Billy isn't completely transported at first, so the two are cut off from each other, unable to communicate. Bonnie is unable to see Billy, though he can see her, and she thinks she's alone. This is when the dragon gets his chance to play the role of Milton's tempter. Bonnie finds herself in a tropical paradise, complete with a crystal-clear pond and a tree bearing a pear-shaped fruit the size and color of an apple. She is then greeted by a dragon who introduces himself as the first dragon, your principal ancestor. This is true in both senses of the word. It is revealed later that this dragon is Eremos, the first dragon to ever walk the earth. But it is also true that Satan, the first dragon in the symbolic sense, is residing in the body of the first dragon in the literal sense of the word. Before Bonnie and Billy were sent to the circles, they were warned not to look in mirrors, because the reflections in the circles would be deceiving. After the dragon introduces himself to Bonnie, he compliments her on the beauty of her wings. Then he comments on how lovely her facial scales are. To Bonnie's knowledge, she doesn't have or want facial scales, but when she touches her face, it does feel scaly. Eremos craftily offers his pool as a mirror for Bonnie to check her reflection in. At this point, Bonnie finally puts two and two together and realizes that she's being tempted. When she refuses to look, the dragon claims that there was no benefit for him in her looking, but says, "I only thought you'd want to see how beautiful you'd become." He plays to Bonnie's vanity just as Milton's Satan played to Eve's vanity in Paradise Lost. However, Bonnie is a strong character. She has knowledge of good and evil that Eve didn't have, and she has faith in God. She is also not very vain, so this technique fails on her. Davis's Satan reverts to twisting words of truth. As Davis describes in his narration, Eremos was subtle, vague and pointed at the same time, spinning falsehoods and mixing them with pulpit sermons. Davis's Satan warps words of good and truth into serving his own purposes. Bonnie replies by quoting a passage from the Bible. "Resist the devil and he will flee from you." But it is clear that Eremos' words are confusing her. Eremos' arrogant response is, "Keep making those hilarious quips, and keep quoting the Bible. You'll eventually get to the passage that names me as master of this realm." No matter how hard Bonnie resists, he continues to barrage her with temptation. When Bonnie finally reaches her breaking point, she calls out to God for help. Billy, who had been watching and unable to hear the entire time, is finally able to defeat the dragon and make him disappear temporarily. The dragon is treating Bonnie like Eve, but Bonnie is not an Eve character since, with help, she is ultimately able to resist the temptations of the devil. When Davis's Satan said that there was no benefit for him if Bonnie checked her reflection, he was lying. Satan's goal is to ruin the happiness of mankind. As Jones states in his book, A Very Short Introduction to Angels, Satan is a creature who turned away from his true happiness and now seeks to spoil the happiness of human creatures. He is seeking to spite God. As Satan says in Paradise Lost, "If then his providence out of our evil seek to bring forth good, our labor must be to pervert that end, and out of good still find means of evil." One way to do this is through deception. Milton's Satan does this several times, from disguising himself as a cherub to get directions to the garden, to the flattering lies he whispers in Eve's ear as he tells her the reason a snake can speak is because he ate of the tree. Davis's Satan also gets to be the deceiver, since he resides in the body of one of the good dragons who is related to almost all of the main characters in one way or another. His situation is set up perfectly for deceiving the original Eremos' family. At one point, Satan convinces Eremos' daughter-in-law Thegosia to come with him on a wild goose chase to save her dragon daughter Roxel. In reality, he's leading her away from where Roxel is, putting Roxel, Thegosia's Anthrozil children Ashley and Gabriel, and their human traveling companions Walter and Karen, in great danger. This is only one small example of the deception that happens in the Dragons in Our Midst and Oracles of Fire books. One of the dragon characters, Mikaidos, puts it this way in a scene where his children are lying to him. "Lying is the fruit of the dragon prototype. His Eden curse made him a legless and wingless serpent, and I thought that ended all dragon deception forever. Obviously, I was wrong." Temptation and deception are only two elements of a satanic character, and they both play into one of the most defining traits of Satan, his pride, rebellion, and fall. When Satan falls, he does everything he can to take everyone along with him, ruining their happiness along with his. Paradise Lost is no exception, and neither is Dragons in Our Midst. Milton's Satan falls because he is too prideful to worship the sun. He thinks himself a higher god and creator of himself. When he does end up in hell, he declares that he can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven, and that it is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. He doesn't fall alone. He takes 1/3 of the angels with him, and even when Milton's Satan gets close to repenting of his sins, he can never follow through with it because he is too proud to admit to all the fallen angels that he was wrong. Remember Goliath from the opening poem? No, not that Goliath. This is a different one, a dragon, the firstborn son of Mikaidos and Thegosia, the dragons Noah rescued on the ark. Goliath, the dragon, will become the fallen dragon just as Satan was the fallen angel. Goliath's fall happens because he listens to what his grandfather says, Eremos. He begins to think that he is better than humans and refuses to serve them as his father has taught him. He convinces his sister and mate, Roxel, to follow Eremos as well. Goliath becomes an Eve character of sorts. In an attempt to take King Arthur's life, Mikaidos comes to make a deal to rescue the king. Roxel remains loyal to Goliath in deceiving their father. Goliath has led his father and his mate into a trap, where 2 dragon slayers lay in wait to kill Mikaidos and Roxel. When this succeeds, Goliath makes his way to Second Eden, where he is turned into a human and begins to slowly corrupt a woman named Angel, preparing for her turn to play the role of Eve. By presenting his dragons as a third race, free to fall yet sufficient to have stood, just as man and angels were, Davis allows his readers to distance themselves from what they think they know about the fall and start over with a new race. This is a race that will have good and bad individuals, one in particular that will give all of dragonkind a bad name. This is a race that will eventually fall and be in need of their own redemption in the form of their own Messiah. Human readers will almost always identify with Adam and Eve in Paradise Lost on some level because Adam and Eve are their ancestors. By replacing human characters with dragons, Davis allows his readers to get a new perspective on the fall, more from the outside looking in. Readers can more objectively view the fall, and can root for the dragons and hope that they don't fall as man did. The end of Paradise Lost is known before the reader even begins. He or she knows that Adam and Eve are going to fall. Davis is able to keep that mystery and suspense by retelling the Paradise Lost tale in such a way that the reader doesn't know how it's going to end. Davis's Satan shares many characteristics with Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost. Davis's Satan takes on the form of an animal, a dragon, just as Milton's took over the body of a serpent. Both characters rebel, but Davis's Satan-stained dragon Goliath not only rebels, but falls and betrays his mate and father. Milton's devil and Davis's devil are both deceptive, attempting to lead the faithful astray. Lastly, but one of the most significant roles of the devil is the tempter. This is the main point and climax of Paradise Lost, and more than one temptation scene occur in Dragons in Our Midst and Oracles of Fire. Davis adds to the tradition of Satan in literature by crafting his devil in a way that his young readers can become interested and engaged in a memorable fantasy plotline, and distance himself from the fall in a way that Paradise Lost can't achieve.